All right, folks. For the next assignment, we're moving up in the difficulty as far as the still life setup is concerned. You've got a couple of a couple of new shapes added to this. Actually, more than a couple. So you still have the cylinder. The processes of drawing the cylinder is the same from the last still life to this still life. We are now adding the shape of the sphere. We're going to add the shape of the cubes or the boxes and the shape of the cone into this. So before we get too far into how to go in and start constructing the still life, I just want to show you real quick, give you a refresher on how to draw cubes, give you a refresher on drawing the spheres itself and the similarities between the cones and the cylinders. So with cubes or with rectangles like you have with these platforms, this is going directly back to the instruction a few weeks ago concerning linear perspective. So with linear perspective, you guys all worked on 1-point perspective. Remember, 1-point perspective is what you get when you have the front face of a cube or the front face of an object that is closest to you, and you can see one side or the bottom or the top. So in this particular picture, you're looking at a 1-point perspective cube or rectangle here. This is also a 1-point perspective view of this rectangle. So to draw those shapes, it's literally going in first. First step is drawing your front face. So if I'm looking at this rectangle here, I would be paying attention to the top angle, the angle on the top and the angle on the bottom to get that rectangle to come through. Then I'm going to look at this receding line that goes back here, this receding line that goes back here. If you're working off of a photograph, you could actually go in and take your ruler and line it up and see that your vanishing point for this piece is directly back like this. So it comes back to that vanishing point. You can approximate it a little bit. Connect from one corner to the vanishing point, from the other corner to the vanishing point, then you get your back edge to come in, and then this corner goes back to the vanishing point as well, just a little bit. You're only going to see just the smallest side of this to go in and to start to get this rectangular shape. So with this, it is 1-point perspective because the closest part of this to you is that front face. I'm kind of throwing a curveball at you though, because the cubes down at the bottom in this piece are not 1-point perspective. The closest point to you is not the front face. Instead, the closest point to you is the corner of the cube. So what this is going to require you to use is 2-point perspective. And what 2-point perspective says is that with a box or with a cube, you've got one side that's going to a vanishing point off on one side of the cube, and then you've got another side that's going to a vanishing point off to another piece. So to draw a cube using 2-point perspective, you're actually going to go in, and the first line that you're going to draw is the line of the corner line of that cube. So it starts like this. That line goes straight up and down, and then this is where you're going to use plumbing, because with this particular setup, your vanishing points are going to be way off of your drawing paper. You can't see these vanishing points here because my point of view is so close to this. So instead of trying to figure out where those vanishing points rest and lie, you're going to look at the angle of the bottom edge of the cube, and you're just going to go in using your plumbing to visually measure. If this is directly horizontal, then I know that this back edge is going to come back like this. So you start with your corner first, and then just approximate the direction that this angle of the bottom of your cube comes up. So here's one edge that comes up like this. Here's my back edge. I've got another angle that comes up at a much higher rate because it's more of an angle than this one is to my point of view. Comes up like this, and then here's my back edge that would come down like that. This, if this cube were freestanding, it would actually look something like this because I can't see the top of it. But this ends up coming in and overlapping on top. So to really get that sense, this is what this is going to end up looking like. You're not going to draw something along these lines. So with the cubes that you see, everybody, no matter where you're sitting, when I walked around and I set this up, everybody has a view that shows a 1-point perspective box and a 2-point perspective box. So you've got to really pay attention. What are the closest things that you're seeing? Are you seeing, of these cubes, is the closest part of it the front face of it, or is the closest front part of it the corner? If it's the front face, you're using 1-point perspective. If it's the corner, you're going to be using 2-point perspectives. So that's the first of the shapes that I want you to pay attention to as far as how to draw these. With the sphere is honestly really, really simple. For both of these spheres, you've got to pay attention to that top edge of the cylinder. That top edge of the cylinder is going to be rounded just a little bit because you can't see inside of it, because that sphere is directly right inside of the cylinder itself. So your first step is to go in and draw that slight curvature of the top of your cylinder. You could go in and you could draw the whole cylinder first. So if I'm drawing off of this, those sides come down like so. Once it comes down and it reaches the bottom, then I've got that bottom curve, and that's all good. We're not worried about that at all. And then with the sphere itself, this is where you're coming in very, very lightly with a tube, like an HB, maybe a 2H pencil, and you're starting to get that circular shape to come through. Now, this is really like drawing a circle that is inside of another object, or drawing a sphere that's resting on another object. Like, that's really, really quite tricky to get, because to get that perfect circle to come through is, as an artist, it's a hard thing to do. So draw this shape lightly and allow yourself the ability to be able to make a mistake. Like when I go in and I draw spheres, I'll draw multiple lines. I'll come in and I'll actually line out some of it, and I'll be able to see where I've got flat points or knobby points, and then I can come in, once I've got multiple lines, I can come in and erase some of these up so that I can trim up and get that shape that I'm looking for. Another real quick way to be able to draw a sphere using a compass is definitely a way that you can do this. I like using my hands. I'll go in and I'll use the bottom of my mid knuckle of my pinky as my pivot point. Apply enough pressure that my hand is staying still, but the pencil is able to move. And then you put your pencil down like this, and just take your paper and spin it around, and as long as you don't move your hands, you've got a perfect circle that actually comes in like that. That is just straight 100% control. Control of your hand, making sure that you're keeping it nice and still as you spin that all the way around. The final shape that you've got to work on, that you're going to have to work on this still life, is the shape of the cone. And the shape of the cone, honestly, is the exact same steps as drawing the shape of the cylinder. The only difference is the top of the cone is smaller and the bottom of the cone is larger. So to get that shape of the cone in, if you're looking at it from this viewpoint, you're going to go in and the top of the cone is going to be a little bit rounded. If this is my center mark, I would lightly draw a line of symmetry down. I would draw that line that shows dividing that cone down directly in half, so that I've got that sense of where my halfway mark is. Then I'd come in and I'd put the bottom curve down at the bottom, making sure that this bottom curve is wider than the top curve, but I'm not going to go in and be like, oh, okay, here's my cone, I'm going to draw this super big. Once again, you're going to use your plumbing. The measurement that I see here is that the top of the size relationship between the top of the cone and the bottom of the cone is that the bottom of the cone is about 3 lengths of the top of the cone. So if this is like this, here's an approximate 1, 2, and 3. That means the bottom edges or the sides of my cone are going to come down straight like this, down like so. So at this point, you've got your 1 point and your 2 point perspective boxes. You've got your cylinder, you've got your sphere, and you've got your cone coming through. These are the steps that you're going to use to draw those basic shapes. Now the question is, okay, once you understand how to draw those shapes, how do you take these shapes and how do you transfer it over onto a large piece of paper? So that trick is the exact same process as what you did with your negative space drawings. It's the exact same process as going in with your first initial still life drawings with the 2 cylinders. First thing that you want to do is you want to find your lowest point, the object that is closest to you. So for me, in this picture, that is going to be this bottom corner of this cube. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to be like, okay, the bottom corner of that cube is going to rest roughly about right here. And so if the bottom of my cube is going to be here, the next thing that I'm going to look at is the angle of the bottom of the cube. If this is that corner that comes up, the angle of the bottom of the cube comes up like this. And I'm just going to roughly map in, okay, this is where this cube is going to go. Then I know that from here, from this corner, I'm going to look at the relationship of drawing straight across right here. Where does this corner lie to this corner? So if this comes straight up like this, I'm going to come up, and here is where the corner of my next cube is going to go. So just a light little, rough little mapping in of where all of these things are going to go first. So if this comes up like this, then I know that this corner right here is going to go up. I've got this corner that comes up to this rectangle that comes up like this. I'm just coming in and I'm just making sure. It's almost like that negative space. I'm just coming around and I'm drawing all of these pieces, paying attention to how each of these relates to the next one. It's all about that spatial relationship. Negative space, drawing this edge to come up. Here's where I'm coming up to my cube, or to the cone, which means the top of my cone is going to be about right here. If the top of my cone is here, if I'm looking at the relationship of this edge, look at that. This edge of the cube goes straight up. It lines up directly with the edge of this cylinder. So the edge of my cylinder comes up like this, just to map that in, and then I know that the top of my sphere is going to be just a little bit higher than the top of my cone. So if this is the top of the cone, that means the top of my sphere is going to be about right here. Just a rough approximation of, all right, where do all of these things end up fitting in? You want to make sure that you've got enough room on your paper to be able to fit the entire piece to come together. Now at this point, now that I've got this all mapped in, now I'm going to go one object at a time. So if this corner comes up like so, now I'm looking at this edge or this angle of this rectangle. If I'm looking, this is straight horizontal, so I see with my plumbing that this comes up at a little bit of a slant, and this goes all the way off of my page. So here's the bottom edge of this rectangle, comes up to the corner of my rectangle right here. This corner goes back, so now I'm going to draw this corner to come back. Here's the back edge, and this comes in like this. Now I'm going to come in. Oh, look, I'm already off. Look at that corner right there. So it looks to me like maybe I didn't draw this down far enough. So I'll come in and I'll just extend this out a little bit. This is why you're drawing using a 2H pencil. Make sure that when you're doing your initial line drawing that you're giving yourself the ability to be able to make mistakes. Because if you're drawing this too dark, it's going to cause so many problems for you. If you're drawing it too dark, you're going to have that battle of going in and erasing and getting those objects in, but trying to keep it clean. So here's where the back edge is coming in back at the back. This comes back like so. If this comes in, this comes in, this comes in, here's where this back edge comes up. And now I'm working on this front face that comes in like this. I could also come in and you just want to work on this one shape at a time. So I know that my cylinder lines up with this corner, which means this edge is going to come back like so. That's going to go straight up. Now I'm looking at the relationship, the gap between the cylinder and this front face. So this is going to come in almost reaching right to this point. This corner goes straight up like this. Here's the back edge of this cube back in the back. Because of the overlapping, I'm not seeing any of this point, so that's all perfectly fine. This comes back like so. Here's the bottom of my cone. That cone's coming up like this, up to about this point. Looks like my approximation was a little bit off, but that's okay. As I'm laying down these initial drawings, I'm not looking for this to be perfect right off the bat. Now I'm looking at this. Here is where this cylinder comes off of my cone. Here's where this back edge comes off of my cone. Here's the opening of the cylinder. You're just going in and you're just drawing each of these objects and the placement of each of these objects as you see them. So if this comes up real close, this comes up like so. I'm looking at the top of my cylinder. That is right above the top of the cylinder over on the side. So here's a little bit of a curve, which means I've got to go in and I've got to get that shape of the spear coming through, mapped into where I've put it. So your initial step is to go in and to just map in, all right, where does all of this stuff lie? How are you going to fit all of these things onto your paper as you see it? Then, once you get your shapes mapped in, then you're going to look at where the table comes in. And then the last step is going in and simply mapping out where your shadows are going to fall. Getting the shadows, getting all of your cast shadows mapped in, figuring out how the value of each piece, this shadow falling on this, how the value of each piece changes depending on the viewpoint of where you're sitting. Once you get, you guys couldn't see any of that. Oh, that's really frustrating. So we're just talking about how all of these pieces come together and looking at the visual relationship of one piece over to the next, the approximate size of all of these things coming through. Once you get this down, your next step is to simply go in and start getting that shading process to come through.